Well, prenuptial agreements are, there's a place for them. If you're coming in to say, for example, it's a second marriage and both parties are pretty established financially and one party has $10 million in the bank and another party has a small business and they're going to get married and they want to keep those things separate. And they want to, make sure that if they do get divorced, that those issues are not going to be before the court, dividing the business or dividing the money that they've inherited or dividing real estate that they presently own. And there's some nuance to that. Often also, there will be a provision in a prenup that no spousal maintenance will be paid. So, people are doing that to protect themselves and the property over a long period of time. The thing about premarital agreements is if you're really young and you're starting out as a partnership in marriage and say you have $100,000 here and $50,000 there and somebody comes to me with a premarital agreement, the desire for one, I often advise them, don't bother. You don't need it. Those pieces of property are non-marital. There's ways to keep track of it. There's ways that I can advise you on how to keep them separate so that if you do get divorced, the non-marital components of that property gets acknowledged by the court. And prenuptial agreements can put pressure on a partnership. It can almost interfere with people just putting everything together and just setting forth hand in hand in a marriage. So I don't advise those for really young people getting married. The one other caveat about prenuptial agreements is that they need to be procedurally fair at the time that they are drafted. In other words, if you're getting married and 2 days before the marriage, you're down in the Caribbean at your destination wedding and you whip out a prenuptial agreement and hand it to your prospective groom-to-be and say, here, you got to sign this before we get married, and they sign it. You're like, well, okay, I guess so. You can imagine how that would feel. They're going to come back, and if the person who presented that tries to enforce it, the court is going to say, this was not procedurally fair. You didn't give this person enough time to consult an individual attorney on their own to make sure that this was a fair document. So that's what procedural fairness is. And then it has to be fair at the time of enforcement. Say you have a prenuptial agreement and then somebody in the marriage, and you've agreed to no spousal maintenance, but you've been married for 20 years and the person who would be the recipient of spousal maintenance, maybe they had a medical condition that prevents them from working and there's plenty of money on the other side. A court is not going to enforce that because it's not fair. They've put 20 years in, maybe they've raised the kids, they can't take care of themselves. The court's going to throw that prenuptial agreement out.